Alright, in this video I'm going to talk about something called opportunity cost, but first I'm going to start with a joke. An economist, an engineer, and a chemist are stuck on a desert island with nothing to eat, but one day a can of food floats from the ocean onto the shore, and they get their hands on it, and the engineer looks at it and says, okay, let's get a rock and smash it open. And the chemist says, well, if we heat it up, that'll make it easier to open. And the economist looks at both of them and says, you guys are making this way too difficult. The solution is really easy. And the other two look at him and they say, okay, what's your idea? And the economist says, simple. First, assume we have a can opener. Okay, so the joke wasn't all that funny, but it illustrates something very important about economics, because economics is the study of how human beings make decisions around scarce resources, and sometimes they rely on those resources just simply for survival. It's either impossible or totally unethical to run experiments. So instead, economists are forced to assume ideal situations where everything is sort of simplified in order to illustrate ideas or illustrate economic concepts. So I'm going to do that during this video, but I just want to warn you ahead of time that what I'm going to talk about, you could poke a lot of little holes in it, but I'm just making it simpler so that you can understand the ideas that are underneath that. Okay, today's idealized situations that I'm going to be using are going to be brought to you by the Italian opera composer Gioachino Rossini. Rossini was born in 1792 in the Papal States in Italy, and his father was a slaughterhouse inspector, and his mother was the daughter of a baker. But in their spare time, she was a singer, and he played the horn in an orchestra. And even though he was apprenticed out to a blacksmith, it turned out that he had other talents, and he displayed those by writing his first opera at the age of 14. By the time he was 38, he'd already written 38 operas, including really, really famous ones like The Barber of Seville and William Tell, neither of which you may have heard of, but I guarantee you that you've heard part of William Tell because the finale of the William Tell Overture was the theme song for The Lone Ranger, which you guys are very familiar with. Anyway, he stopped writing anything, basically, at the age of 38, and produced nothing from then on. And one of the theories as to why is that he really basically liked to party. So I said I was going to be talking about opportunity cost, but really I'm going to talk about three things: opportunity cost, making decisions at the margins, and the law of increasing cost. Scarcity implies that we have to make choices. We don't have an infinite amount of resources and time available to us at any given moment, so we're always having to give things up. Even on July 11th, when 7-Eleven is giving out free Slurpees, you still have to take 5 minutes getting to 7-Eleven, and 5 minutes standing in line, and 5 minutes getting home from 7-Eleven, and you're giving up 15 minutes that you could have spent tweeting about your deep thoughts, or reading celebrity gossip, or listening to really bad music. So that means that everything that you do, every single thing that you do, means that you have to give up doing something else, even if it's a really obvious choice. That is, there's a cost. You have to give something up. And the best thing that you give up as the result of a decision that you make is called the opportunity cost. Okay, so I'm going to bring out Signor Rossini just for a very simple example of opportunity cost in action. Let's say that in any given year, Rossini could either write 2 operas or 5 sonatas. Okay, so the opportunity cost of writing 2 operas is 5 sonatas, if these are the only 2 things that he can do. And the opportunity cost of writing 5 sonatas is writing 2 operas. The opportunity cost of writing 1 opera is 2.5 sonatas. So, right, it's a very simplified example. I'm sure that if he only wrote operas and sonatas, that he would get really sick and tired of operas and sonatas, and he would long for a concerto or something like that. But, again, this is just to demonstrate this idea of opportunity cost. Most decisions that we face in life or just in economics are not one or the other, though. It's not usually sonatas or operas. It's not usually Blackhawks or Bruins. Usually the decisions that we're making are called decisions on the margins. In other words, we're deciding how much of something to do. So to illustrate this idea of decisions on the margins, I'm going to bring out Rossini again. So one of those theories about why he retired was that he really loved to party. So let's say, and let's set up a situation in which he's writing operas, but he doesn't really care about writing operas. The only thing he cares about is earning enough money to party. Okay, just to spend a few years of his life partying. So I'm gonna show you a table of possible choices that he could make, number of operas he could write, and number of years partying that each opera is going to give him.
Okay, so here is our chart for Rossini showing how many operas he might write, and if he writes that many operas, how many years he's going to have to spend writing, and for the operas, how many years of savings he'll get if he writes that many. So if he writes 3 operas, he'll get 3 years of savings, but he's going to have to spend 2 1/4 of those years writing the operas. So again, here we're assuming the can opener because I didn't do any research to figure out if it's really going to spend if it's really going to cost half a year to write one opera for your typical opera composer or for Rossini himself or anything like that. And we're assuming that Rossini is a perfectly rational actor who could know all this stuff in advance. But a few things I want to point out about this chart. So notice that if he wants to write one opera, it's going to cost him 0.5, so half a year, and if he wants to write 2, it's going to cost him 1.25. So let's go through the marginal cost here. So the marginal cost is where we're making that decision at the margins. So the first one, he spends half a year writing as opposed to nothing, no time writing. So the marginal cost of the first one is 0.5. The marginal cost of the second one is how much extra time he needs to spend, and that is from 0.5 to 1.25, 0.75. I'm sure you're glad I'm doing this math for you. And then if he wants to write 3 instead of 2, he's going to have to spend a whole extra year. And then from 3 to 4, he's going to go 1 1/4 years writing that. And then the fifth one's going to cost him 1 1/2 years. And the sixth one is actually going to cost him 2. And we use this information to make these decisions at the margins, to make it easier for us. So, bonus points to anyone who can use this information to figure out exactly how many operas Rossini should write in order to get the maximum amount of years of savings that he doesn't have to spend writing, that he can instead spend doing the thing that he loves most, which is partying, preferably in some place like Paris.
Finally, I want to talk about the law of increasing costs. And in that last example, hopefully you noticed that each new opera actually cost Rossini more and more of his time. So even though the first one only took half a year to write, if he wants to write a second one, that second one is going to add more than half a year to the total time he has to spend writing an opera. And you guys know from personal experience that the more time you spend on one activity, the less you get out of each additional unit of time from that activity. So, you guys know this from studying. If you guys study for 15 minutes, that first 15 minutes is pretty productive, but the second 15 minutes probably isn't as productive as the first 15 minutes was. You're still better off, but not as much better off as you were after the first 15. And then the third 15 minutes is a little bit less productive than that until, after you've been studying for a couple hours, you're just passed out on your computer or keyboard. And that's the law of increasing costs. So the more you do of one thing, the more of something else it's going to cost you. And Rossini faced that in that table. So the 3 things that I've talked about in this video are opportunity cost, which is the best thing that you give up as the result of making a decision. And there's always an opportunity cost for every decision because of scarcity. The second thing was making a decision at the margins, which is mostly what we're doing. Which is deciding how much of something to do, how much of something to make, rather than just doing this or doing something else. And the third thing was the law of increasing costs, which is that the more of something you do, the more it costs you, or the less you get from it. So those are the 3 things for today, and I will see you next time.